All right. Hello, Dave. Yeah, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Thank you. Um, for those of you who don't know, Dave, he runs a YouTube channel called, was it Professor Dave Explains?
hmm
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, and basically on his channel, he covers a wide range of topics relating to science so that the general public can more easily understand those topics. But Dave, why don't you give us a short introduction about your channel?
Sure. So I started the channel in 2015, when I uploaded some organic chemistry lectures, which were recited essentially from memory from when I had taught organic chemistry at Trade University a couple years prior. So I just kind of tossed up some OChem lectures, and they were received favorably. So I decided to do general chemistry, and then moved into biochemistry, biology, mathematics, physics, astronomy. Sort of exhausted the topics that I have really any business explaining, even at a basic level. But then I had momentum, so continued to expand, started hiring writers, experts in their respective fields to write scripts. And now I'm continuing into other areas of science, even social sciences and humanities, and just trying to make a really enormous database of educational tutorials.
Wow, nice. Yeah, for me, as a university student, I find these types of videos really helpful.
hmm
However, to go into today's topic, which is you recently published a video about 2 weeks ago, I believe, titled Quantum Debunking Quantum Mysticism, something like that, right?
A little nicer. I put it a little saltier. It's called Quantum Mysticism is Stupid.
Yeah,
So,
got it.
yeah.
That really hits home.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I really realized is that even though you do try to make these complex topics more easier to digest, there always is a bit of a knowledge gap that the general public may be susceptible to, and so they may buy into a lot of like conspiracy theories or just flat out like illogical arguments, and that can lead to a whole host of other issues like mental health issues, and these people get sucked into cults and they can't tell which sources are reliable, especially when these sources are not qualified to speak on scientific topics. So yeah, I just want to ask to start off, like in your videos in general, not only for the video we're talking about today, how do you, are there any specific steps uh, that you take to ensure that, the public has a higher capacity to think for themselves and to discern credible scientific arguments from just flat out like BS?
Well, I mean, I just try to deliver as much comprehension as possible. So, I mean, the vast majority of my content is aimed at students. This sort of debunking effort is a little bit of a different thing that I've gotten into only recently, through flat Earth debunking, and then I started doing other topics. So it's definitely a departure from the academic tutorials. With the academic tutorials, my strategy is simply to try to convey the information as succinctly and simply as possible, more so than any other outlet available. So I just want to deliver those light bulb moments so that a student can go, oh, I get that like main thing. Now I can go to lecture and like put all the additional details on top. With the debunking stuff, I mean, it's twofold. Number one, I try to again deliver the comprehension of these basic topics, but I also want to kind of deconstruct the anatomy of the con. So when somebody falls for something like quantum mysticism, I want to show people why. You know what I mean? I want to show people, okay, what is quantum mysticism? Well, it's these con men of varying backgrounds that misuse the terminology of physics and deliberately misrepresent things like the double slit experiment. Here's what they say it's about. It's wrong. And so, like, when people can start to, at least if they're rational people that don't base their identity around something like this, right? Maybe they saw What the Bleep Do We Know when that came out, that bogus pseudo documentary, and went, oh, that's pretty neat. I'll remember that as something to talk about at parties. If I can show them this is wrong, here's why, and here's why you believed them. right? Because maybe you were prone to this kind of fanciful thinking, or tie it into the spirituality. I try to show how, some people may be seeking divinity but don't have the organized religion to fall back upon, and so this sort of usurps that place. I just want to come at it from all angles. Like it's just as much social commentary as it is a science lesson, And I think that if people can be shown that with extreme clarity, a certain percentage of them will have the maturity to say, yeah, that's pretty much why I fell for that. I understand that now. I'm going to maybe pull back from entertaining that sort of thing. So now some people are going to be way too deep into it and will just get triggered and curse me out in the comment section, and that's fine too. That's not a big deal. It happens to me every day. So,
Yeah, you can't please everyone.
No.
Yeah, I also noticed that with your debunking videos, they tend to be a lot longer than your like bite-sized pieces on specific topics. So
Mhm.
I'm guessing that you dividing your video format into the shorter videos are just for general education, and then the longer videos debunking adds that needed like extra detail for them to get all the facts
Yeah.
down and the misconceptions down.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
And in retrospect, sorry, finish up.
Oh yeah, no, I was just asking you like if that was the case, whether like dividing those video formats like really helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I could even have just started a separate channel, but I didn't really know that I was going to be into it. I thought I was going to be pretty, I just wanted to do one flat earth thing to respond to these con men that had, harassed me. Excuse me. And so looking back on it now, I definitely could have started another channel. Maybe I would still prefer to keep it on one channel, but they are certainly distinct styles. I mean, when I'm doing academic content, it's curriculum aligned. And so I can go learning objective by learning objective, right? This is work and energy. And then this is, kinetic energy. And, I can like really split it up into smaller chunks by keyword, but when I'm debunking one thing, first of all, I don't want to acknowledge it beyond one video. You know what I mean? It's just some dumb fad. I can encapsulate it in one video, and I don't really want to split it up either. I want it to kind of be the standalone thing, but they have gotten longer. Originally my debunks were closer to 20, 25 minutes. Now the quantum mysticism is probably the longest I've ever done. It's like 50 something minutes. I'm actually planning one, now as a response to an evangelical chemist that's going to be a record. It's going to be at least 90 minutes long.
Nice.
It's just so much to respond to, but it is definitely a totally other format, which I found that I enjoy and I'm good at. But it's I would, there's some crossover. Some viewers of my academic tutorials like to go over there and see the saltier version of me, and some people are familiar with me from the debunks, and then they go, oh, this is interesting, maybe I should go and watch the actual academic tutorials and learn what actual science undergraduate students are learning, so that I can arm myself with the scientific worldview to avoid this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and
So.
also as for the question of like creating separate channels versus keeping it all on one channel, I think that the fact that you've kept it all on one channel, and the fact that you have all of these like short videos, and you have that like academic scientific background, gives you much more credibility in making these debunking videos, rather than you just being some random person on the internet, right?
Some guy. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So now to get into the video itself, could you give us a brief explanation of who these specific parties that were involved in the video, that were making these false scientific claims, parties that in the spiritual community, i.e. either YouTubers or spiritual authors that were involved, and B, what were the scientific arguments that they were making, and how are they wrong? And lastly, what are the negative effects that have come from their arguments, in terms of the way they've misled followers, or caused harm to their emotional well-being, etc.
Yeah. So the video starts by kind of outlining, really what quantum mysticism is, because a lot of people don't know what it is, or maybe are vaguely familiar with it, but haven't really found a label to match it. And so I try my best to describe it in this is the way that I think it is defined, is best defined, is that it's this way of thinking that quantum physics is very complicated, so it's magic. Therefore, if magic can be framed using the terminology of quantum physics, it's real. So this is people who just sort of they're spewing magical, fantastical nonsense, but they use words like quantum and frequency and vibration and things like this to disguise it as science and take on the guise of scientific expertise. So there are hundreds and hundreds of culprits all over the internet. I chose 3 to do something pretty specific. The first target, and probably the largest target, was Deepak Chopra. I chose him because he is probably, I mean, if you want to think of somebody as the father of quantum mysticism, it's probably him. Because this sort of stemmed from the larger New Age movement that was coming out in the 70s and the 80s. And in the late 80s, early 90s, he had a couple of books with quantum in the title. And so obviously all of these perpetrators, they use the word quantum, and it doesn't, they use it totally inappropriately. Quantum is a buzzword that to the quantumistic means magic. It means whatever they want it to mean to sell this, the magic beans that they're selling. And so a lot of his talking points coming up were about the power of the mind and the ability of the mind to manipulate reality, and how the mind can heal you. You can heal yourself with your mind, or even, he has a whole book about how you can, stop the aging process, which is ridiculous because he's now quite old and obviously he wasn't able to do it. So right off the bat, we're seeing immediately the very, very, very tangible negative ramifications and the danger of this, because we already have enough of an establishment sentiment towards science, what most people would call Western medicine, or science, what rational people would refer to as science-based medicine. There's already this pseudoscientific trend amongst the public that can be boiled down to a distrust of science-based medicine. And so this type of thinking, from what people perceive to be as an authority, because Deepak was actually a doctor, right? He was an endocrinologist. So they perceive him as an authority, and perhaps in endocrinology, he can say some things that make sense, but with physics, he knows absolutely nothing what he's talking about. And so when people are, when these very clever con men can identify this sort of bias that is prevalent in the population, it's very easy for them to exploit it and help drive people away from science-based medicine to these alternatives, which are totally unsubstantiated and quite frankly, according to anybody with scientific education, very blatantly frivolous and meaningless. So we're talking about your Reiki and your energy healing and your crystal healing and this kind of stuff, which is quite dangerous when considered to be an acceptable form of healthcare, really, which is what some people do. So some people just go, I have a little bit of a headache, I'm going to go to the Reiki and I'm going to get a placebo effect and I'll feel a little better. All right, I'm not, going to like spend all my time attacking these kinds of people, but that unfortunately the narrative doesn't stop there. The narrative continues into a large population of people. Anything, drugs are evil, and Western medicine is evil, and the hospital system is evil, and it's very easy to take some faults or with our healthcare system and amplify them to reach the conclusion that all of this science-based medicine is wrong, and this spirituality is the only real way to heal oneself. And so it can't be understated how dangerous. It can't be overstated, I should say, sorry, how dangerous that line of thinking is. So that was Deepak. And then I went on to a channel called Spirit Science, which is really a lot of the same stuff, but even more blatantly frivolous word salad nonsense. Like, it's really astounding to me that anybody could could watch this stuff and not laugh out loud the whole time. But he's got over 1 million subscribers and does the same thing like Deepak. You know, it's all about, okay, now you're going to buy this video series and then you're going to come to this retreat. It's all about these retreats that are, you know, Deepak charges like $5K with no lodging, or, you know, for like a weekend retreat. So this is where this is why Deepak is worth $150 million, but it just charges obscene amounts for all these ridiculous things. So spirit science, I kind of plowed through that really quick just to go, look, this is dumb, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But that was a good vehicle for helping bring some clarity to the definitions of words like energy and vibration and frequency and all of these words that are just so blatantly misused. I want people to understand the actual definitions of these words. And then I finished off with a channel called actualize.org, which actually I had not been aware of. A viewer of mine tipped me off to them when to this guy Leo, when he told me about how unhealthy it was. He had kind of gone down this rabbit hole and was having kind of suicidal thoughts, like a lot of the people in there, because this guy is a cult leader. That it stems from the core of it is quantum mysticism and self-help, like many cults. But then it evolved into a really aggressive form of solipsism, and you know, nothing is real, and and he has a lot of language in there. It's that can, it's very difficult to misconstrue as anything other than promoting suicide, and so multiple people have attempted suicide based on his words. And so you know, when he sent me that, I was like, look, if you do the research and you get me the videos and the timestamps, I don't have the time to do that, but since you know this world, if you want to give me all those timestamps and put it all together, I'll include that in this video I'm planning. So I just wanted to throw that in the end, because seemed like a pretty worthy target to to elucidate. So yeah, that's the video pretty much.
Yeah, just to comment on Leo's videos, you know, for those of you who will be watching this, I got into spirituality. I was raised in a Buddhist household. I'm from Myanmar, and so, you know, where like 90% of the population is Buddhist. So I was raised a Buddhist, but I didn't really get into spirituality again until, like, you know, I had a lot of personal issues in my life growing up in middle school and high school. And so from that place of vulnerability, like, I wanted to find a solution to all that pain that I felt, right? So channels like actualize.org, like, I think that was one of the first like spirituality channels that I came across, like, gave me that sense of comfort, and also that it gave me a willingness to, like, explore, you know, the larger questions of life, right, if you want to call it that way. But going along that route, what ended up happening for me was, you know, like, in, I think, my second year of uni, so that was like probably 1.5 years ago. Yeah, I started getting into that, like, solipsistic worldview, and yeah, I had these, like, you know, like, I had that kind of like existential anxiety of like, oh shit, like, am I the only person that exists? Like, you know, which is like nonsense, obviously. But and
I
through my,
mean, just to temper what you just said, it's not complete nonsense
yeah, it's like,
philosophically, but to talk about it as though it is a logical conclusion of physics is false.
right,
And we can
yeah,
talk later about why that is, but continue.
right, yeah. But not only that, not only in terms of, like, you know, conflating that kind of metaphysical worldview with science, like, obviously um, there is a huge mistake in that, but just what you said about, like, the emotional toll, the emotional harm it does on seekers, you know, without, like, um, putting, like, these caveats out there, like, hey, like, don't take everything I say at face value, obviously, right? Even though, like, Leo does say that from time to time, but I feel like these you know,
Yeah.
channels with the message they have to preach, they don't emphasize that nearly as enough, you know,
No.
as in science, where the whole
Yeah.
method is about, you know, from what I understand, right? It's, can can we like can we falsify, or, you know, as many things as possible until we come to the point where, okay, like, this you know, this is actually like the result of the, you know, so and so variable, like, that is we're not from what I understand, like the scientific method isn't so much about like finding the truth or what our conception of the truth is, so much as it is like what could it not be, right? It is a method of negation, almost, if you want to call it, before arriving at the truth. Something like that, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any scientist would use the word truth, but I mean, obviously, falsifiability is a big portion,
Yeah,
and so I mean, you want to construct models that are useful that describe reality, but there's always room for improvement. And if you falsify something, or if you add on top of it, there's always room for that. But obviously, falsifiability, if it's not falsifiable, it's not science. And I mean, to what you said about Leo, yeah, once in a while he throws in a thing like a little caveat, but I also showed multiple clips from multiple videos where he's just saying things like, what I'm saying is absolute truth. And if you
right.
deny that, that's your brain trying to get out of having to confront this is absolute truth. This is what cult leaders say. I mean, they're sociopaths. This is very predatory behavior. And I mean, you talking about what kind of a mind frame you were in, that's common amongst all the people who get involved, who become enthusiastic about his content. I mean, it's just like Scientology. Scientology started out as self-help. Everybody was going in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't know, as it was ramping up, and they got their little e-meters and they're saying, oh, what's wrong in your life? And like, let's help you get your life together. That's how they hooked them. And now look at this colossus that
Yeah,
Scientology is, and how many lives are ruined, and how many, it's the amount of suffering due to Scientology. So it's like, he may be just some guy on the internet, but L. Ron Hubbard was just some guy writing dumb sci-fi stories.
right,
And
right.
look at what Scientology, like, you got to take these guys seriously and neutralize this influence, So
Yeah, and I think also as these cults grow, like for instance Scientology, I think Tom Cruise was a part of it, or still is a part of it. Like you start to attract like high profile, like personalities, right? And
yeah,
that's when like things really spiral out of control. That's when like the average person thinks that these cults are more credible than they really are. So yeah, what you said, like neutralizing it before it gets out of hand.
yep,
And not only that, I think that providing an alternative perspective that is not only true on a scientific or factual level, but also provides a higher level of emotional well-being just in general, for whatever these seekers want to accomplish in life, right? Whether that's like
yeah. There are healthy outlets. I mean, I don't know whether I would label myself a spiritual person or not. I mean, at a certain point, this is all just words that we're choosing to describe mental states. But I mean, there are plenty of outlets to derive meaning. I derive meaning from my work, and I derive meaning from art, and I derive meaning from my family, and I derive meaning from a lot of different ways, and I feel fulfilled as a person, and complete as a person. And everybody can we all want to feel that way, and we all have license to seek that feeling in whatever way we choose. And if you choose a religion, I think that's totally fine. And I think, I'm not religious, and I don't like religions, but if you like yours and you go to a church and you have a sense of community and you like to pray and you like to whatever rituals are a part of your religion, that's all fine. That doesn't bother me. It's when these beliefs and practices infringe upon the rights of others, or make assertions about the nature of physical reality that are indefensible. That's where you begin to cross the line, because you're influencing the people around you. And obviously I could talk all day long about Christian evangelicals, and the utter damage and destruction that they cause to young impressionable minds. But that's where the line, so spirituality, that's all fine to me. And however you want to find meaning and add color to your life experience, you go for it. But we all have to be aware that there are these people out there that are predators, and look for people that are young and impressionable and seeking meaning, and they give them false meaning deliberately for money. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of predators, you mentioned that they're oftentimes they're probably like full-blown sociopaths or whatnot, or like leaning towards those like dark triad
Yeah.
tendencies. But
Yeah, Leo is
uh,
100% a sociopath. You can watch him talk for 30 seconds and it's very clear that he's a sociopath. Yeah.
yeah, I was thinking, do you think that these cult leaders in the spiritual space, or just cult leaders in general, do you think that they're deliberately like trying to, manipulate their followers? What I mean is in terms of like, with do they have like deliberate malevolent intent, if you want to call it that, or do you believe that they're really they actually buy into the worldview that they're preaching, like they themselves
Mhm.
are 100% invested in it, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I lean towards the side of deliberate malevolent intent. Obviously, this would differ slightly from figure to figure. I don't want to completely discount the powers of self-delusion and narcissism. I mean, I think that it's certainly possible for somebody to construct this sort of fantasy where they are a messianic figure, and then the level of mental gymnastics they may go through to convince themselves of its reality. I mean, that's for a therapist to decode. I'm not qualified to say, but I mean, definitely some of them are, at least to some degree, deliberately deceiving and manipulative. I mean, because this is very lucrative, and I think a lot of people recognize the talent in themselves to do it, realize that number one, it's a way to make money. Number two, it's a way to get status and power, which, a lot of people want. And it sure as hell beats having some boring, lame job that you hate. Who doesn't want to be a little mini celebrity in their own, and
Right.
in some kind of small community, or even a large one, So the basis in evolutionary psychology is quite clear, but it certainly does not excuse the behavior, and we have to identify these figures and neutralize them however we can.
Uh-huh. Uh, do you think, hypothetically speaking, that it would be beneficial for so-called people in the debunking space like yourself to, let's say, reach across the aisle and maybe try to uh, talk to these figures and like set up if they are open, which the probability is low, but by some off chance that one of them might be open to a conversation, however genuine that might be, in their intent. Do you think it would be beneficial to have these sorts of discussions, and to for debunkers to point out like where they're wrong and how they can improve, to their face, right? Like in a
Mhm.
non-antagonistic manner, of course. Like,
Yeah, non-antagonistic. It's going to be tough because the intent on their part is not genuine. Their intent is to maintain the facade, and so it's tricky. It's a very good question, and it's something I think about a lot, because initially I wanted to do more debates, but then I saw that it was not fruitful as I had hoped, and so I began to focus on just debunking pieces, because we need this information out there. Um, I think that there certainly could be instances, and there are scenarios in which it could play out that a live confrontation would be beneficial. But the thing is that one must really, really hone their skill in that realm, because these people, you know, spend all day, every day thinking about their con and crafting their rebuttals to criticism.
right.
And if someone has mastered that skill, it's very difficult to penetrate. And so one would need razor sharp precision. And then the risk of failing at such an endeavor is that you take on some con man or somebody who's a charlatan who's promoting pseudoscience, and if you fail to debunk them in that setting, they have succeeded in elevating their pseudoscience to the status of a competing or rival worldview.
Oh,
So if you do that to Electric Universe and then you don't debunk them live, then all of a sudden the viewer will think, well, okay, so we have mainstream science and we have this alternative, and it sounds like they're equals. And so I'm not sure what, where in reality you have science and you have pseudoscience. So I think that I wouldn't. It certainly could work, and I'm hoping to get to a point where I am skilled enough to pull that off frequently. Right now, I'm just focusing on the pieces and on the debunking pieces, but at one point, I maybe would like to pursue that. But yeah, the risk is there. It's not as easy as having the facts on your side. It's
right.
just not, because one must persuade, and one must persuade the relatively science illiterate. So saying something that's scientifically factually true may not persuade, and that's something that everybody has to realize. If you are one to kind of go down this path of the, as I have done, the debunking and so forth.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you pointed out debating and persuasion is another skill in and of itself. Like just because,
Completely.
like you said, just because you know all the facts doesn't mean that you will be able to convey them well. And
Yep.
I think, for for the for your audience, like when they watch your debunking videos, like like even I myself like get the sense that, oh, like you really have all your arguments like nailed down. But I think a large part of that is, of course, like you write those arguments down beforehand. I imagine you probably have like a script
Sure, I
and
write a
whatnot.
script. Yeah.
But then being able to pull that off in front of a live audience, like whether virtually or in person, and under that like
Yep.
psychological pressure, and knowing what's at stake, and knowing how like manipulative these cult leaders could be, because they're, like you said, they're always obsessing over their public image, right? So
Yep.
for them, this is like another Tuesday for them. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
because the problem, the offshoot there is that one strategy that is very, very effective for these people is that, let's say you're a con man in the realm of physics or whatever it is. One technique is to just throw out all of these claims in that amount to basically esoterica, and almost nobody could possibly counter all of them in real time.
Right.
Whereas a simple Google search in 20 seconds would turn up, oh, well, what you just said is objectively false. So given that I'm not an expert in any academic field. I mean, chemistry, I know quite a lot, but I still wouldn't label myself an expert in chemistry. I'm certainly not an expert in physics. But that's the thing. You don't have to be an expert to debunk these things. But if you are such a con man, I know of a couple actually in that sort of alternate cosmology space that are in the habit of doing this, where it's just like, oh, did you see this study, or did you read this paper, or what about this fact or this phenomenon over here? And it's like, well, no, I didn't see everything ever, and I can't respond to that in real time, but I know that you're being deceiving and manipulative. But to somebody who's going into that exchange on their side already, they will say, well, he knows some science that you don't. Well, no, he doesn't. He's just throwing stuff out of his ass. But in a live setting, if you either have it on the top of your head or you don't. So that's the trouble there.
Yeah, I think going off of that, like I think a great idea would be to, if if we were to host such a debate, to have an impartial moderator on the side whose responsibility is, one, to like ask like counter arguments for each of the the debaters, or whatever you want to call them, but also to
fact check.
Fact check like on Google, just in like real time.
Yeah.
Like, oh, is this true or not? And then like the argument can like go from there. But I think having that would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from these cult leaders and debate tactics and whatnot, I want to talk more about the idea of like religious phenomena and religious experience, because I think that of all the major world religions, even though they are very different from one another, like Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, etc., and their teachings are different, I still think that through my own research, that they are founded in actual human experiences that got mythologized along the way, and those experiences might have been altered or retold based on the different cultural factors of the time. So do you think that there is any scientific legitimacy to these experiences that are depicted in religious texts? And if so, like how can we tell? Like how can we discern what's just a superstitious pseudoscientific teaching from like actual legitimate religious experience in those texts?
Well, there's certainly science behind having like a profound experience, whether it's induced by psychedelics, or whether it's induced by, whatever it's induced by. And I think that's what religion taps into. We have these archetypes, these stories that we tell over and over again, and all the religions tell the same ones. As much as Christians want to pretend that their religion is unique, it's almost entirely plagiarized from older religions, which something I wish they all knew. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly regard it as pure superstition in terms of the literal aspect. I mean, I see these as clear myths, but that's because no one ever told me that they were anything but myths. I grew up in a vacuum of religion, so I had never even heard of the concept of religion until I was maybe 6. And I was totally perplexed by it. I was confused immediately because I never had the experience of knowing of it as anything other than stories, old stories that people believe. So that's how I've always seen it. But in terms of a religious experience, everybody's experience is subjective, and I'm not here to criticize somebody. If you go to church and it's a lovely, the architecture is very awe-inspiring, and there's a pipe organ and it's really awe-inspiring sound, or there's a gospel choir, and you feel a feeling, and you feel a reverence for nature, and you feel a reverence for existence, or whatever you have. This is totally fine. And I mean, this is human nature, and we all want those feelings of interconnectedness and purpose, and everybody's free to seek those out in whatever way they please, whether it's religion or career or art or relationships or anything you want. Again, it's just that line where people start to try to use those institutions and constructs to try to make assertions about the nature of physical reality that are objectively false and contradict what we've gathered empirically over the past millennia, or especially the past couple centuries. That's where I think that the educated population needs to push back on that influence. So I kind of forgot exactly what the question was, but I think I maybe answered some of it.
Yeah. That pretty much sums it up. But I also want to go into maybe the idea of alternative explanations for phenomena, right? Because it's one thing to deconstruct religious arguments and like how they're false from a scientific point of view. But do you think it's also possible to, from a scientific point of view, like posit alternative explanations for teachings? Like, let's say in Buddhism, we have the idea of like seeing past lives, right? Like, supposedly, the story goes that once the Buddha became enlightened, he saw all the causes of suffering in existence, and he went beyond them, after like 6 years of meditation and asceticism. You know, in that story, right? Like let's say hypothetically someone has like a past life experience in meditation, or they claim to see like multiple past lives. Do you think that, obviously we can debunk them and say like, oh, there's no evidence for the continuity of like a non-physical soul, right? That's one angle to approach this issue from. But could people from the scientific community also say that, oh, maybe this could be another, this could be attributed to another experience, like childhood, like childhood repressed, like childhood emotions, or their specific, like the way their brain works, or what do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard of anything like that. One could investigate that. To me, it's just people wanting magic powers. I mean, but that's the thing. I mean, like I fully acknowledge the value of. I mean, I think that there's something to be said for meditation or even asceticism, and what kind of mental states that can conjure, and the clarity of thought and the realizations or the epiphanies one might have when undergoing those practices. And so there's something very powerful there, but I think the tendency is to overstate it and go too far and go, okay, there is this incredible wisdom maybe that comes from these practices, and now let's take our paintbrush of fantasy and put another layer on top, and now I'm seeing past lives and I'm doing these things. And I don't know, maybe we're all in a simulation and we do all have past lives, and they are accessing them. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But the way I see it, it's just, we have this propensity for frivolity and fantasy, and the human condition is that we recognize the difference between infinity and finitude, and we lament that we are not the former. We lament the fact that we can comprehend infinity as a concept and that we are not it. We
Right.
die. We don't this is what drives people to believe in afterlives and omniscient, omnipotent deities and all of these things, because we understand it as a concept, but it's, in my opinion, is not real. There is no such thing as infinity in a practical sense. But this is, I think it's just a relic of the human psyche. It's just a fragment of what we are, and so we seek it out time and time again. It takes all these different forms, but yeah.
Yeah. I think just speaking of infinity, that brings up an existential question. Before all this, I think 2 years ago, I interviewed another guy. He's in the spiritual space, but how his view was actually of spirituality was very similar to the way you approach it. He doesn't believe in like supernatural explanations and stuff, but he created this term called biospirituality, right? So what I mentioned about like past lives being, if they could be related to like childhood trauma or something like that, that was actually an idea I got from him. He published a book called Unspirituality: Permission to be Human. His name is Zen, Czenn. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and basically what he said was, when he was young, like he grew up in an abusive household, and then he wanted to kill himself. And then he went on this like spiritual journey where he did get indoctrinated with these like new age cults and evangelical cults and all that. But then later he actually, um, you know, saw the errors in their ways and like abandoned all of that. But then he also ended up with his own like supernatural-ish experience. At first, he didn't know what to make of it, but then later, through emotional work and like seeing different like psychologists and stuff, like um, his explanations kind of steer towards like something like what Carl Jung might say, right? So it's a very interesting worldview to say the least. But what I really wanted to say was that through that experience, what he realized was that uh, spirituality is mainly just about it's spiritual realization is really just a maturation process. It can also be seen as like another phase of like adulthood or the gaining of wisdom. But he also says that like we can't go too far and say that like, oh, we're omniscient or we're free from all suffering. And he also says that like that'll never be the case. We just learn to make meaning from our suffering through the newfound wisdom that we gain
Yeah,
through these
I agree.
experiences,
I
right?
would go even further. Not just we are not omniscient, but that such an entity cannot be that, and even beyond human. But I agree. I mean, I also have had very profound experiences, very meaningful experiences. But I don't understand why someone would jump to attribute them to the divine. Why can't they simply be the concrete phenomenon that they are? You know what I mean? Whether it's psychedelics or but I think it's important to note that a lot of such people have these experiences in response to recovering from trauma. You know
Mm,
what I mean? So I think that makes us have to discuss how these are perhaps defense mechanisms in a way, as people are trying to heal themselves from traumatic experiences. So it's just kind of how the human brain works, and I think it's fascinating. I think there are a lot of scientists that are studying the neuroscience of the spiritual experience and all these things, and I think they're doing fascinating work. I don't know too much about it. I'd love to learn more, but yeah, it's just human brains thinking of stuff,
yeah.
and but what I want to push back on is that there's so many religious people that would scoff at that and say, oh, that's meaningless, and why are you trying to reduce everything down to the blah blah blah? And it's like, I don't get that. I don't understand what you mean. Like, I know profundity. I feel it. I can manifest it. Why would one suggest that profundity is not real if it is not attributed to a deity? Why?
Isn't that
Where's that?
enough, right?
Yeah.
Isn't
In
this,
fact,
yeah.
I would make the opposite. I would make the opposite argument that in diving into the particulars of physical reality, and we learn more and more about the nature of physical reality. We uncover the secrets. It's much more valuable, much more profound than just there's a guy in the sky and it's magic. To me, that's a cop out. That's meaningless. There's nothing there. It's totally empty and vacant for me personally. But then again, I'm coming from a place of very little trauma. I had a pretty stable childhood and not too much. Everybody has like little problems and things, but I didn't have to face any kind of large scale abuse and recover from that. And so, I'm privileged in that regard, and so everybody's journey is different, and that's fine. But so to summarize, I would never attack someone's route to spirituality and meaning. That's personal, and that's fine. It's I won't belabor the point. I already said it twice, but just when we're talking about the nature of physical reality, right? These arguments from some religious place, they're no match for empiricism. We go with empiricism when we want to probe the nature of physical reality. So,
yeah, I do want to say that, with my own bringing, I didn't experience too much trauma. I did go through a lot of emotional hardships and whatnot, but yeah. So, I think it's interesting how you pointed out trauma may shape our understanding of physical reality, mainly because we have that emotional stake in it. We want to escape from our own pain, so it's kind of like our our body copes with it by the need for divinity, right?
For sure.
Then, yeah.
Yep.
As we heal, we can kind of step back from that and say oh, wait a minute, we shouldn't lose our grip of discerning fact from
come back to it.
Right.
Yeah,
Obviously.
I think you've outlined the journey of millions of people in that single statement. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to end on just two questions, two important questions. One is, you mentioned that lately people are indeed conducting research into spiritual neuroscience, if you want to call it that. It's an emerging field. Personally, I'm really, really fascinated by this field. When we talked a year earlier, when I sent you those emails, actually, I believe 2 or 3 sources. One of these sources was from a Harvard neuroscientist named Jeffrey A. Martin, and basically, he did a clinical study of just testing meditators in his meditation course over a few months, and to see whether they could sustain their shifts in consciousness, right? Sustain higher levels of happiness. And he did have varying results. So seeing the success of these types of experiments, and these scientists actually being able to track the changes in the brain that occurred from these experiences, without resorting to pseudoscience, do you think that there are any specific measures they should take in their scientific method in order to make sure that they don't veer into pseudoscience when they're doing these studies?
Oh, I wouldn't dare to to tell a neuroscientist how to do science. They know much better than I do. I think really what I think it's more about the way the press interprets scientific research. That's sometimes where we go astray. There are some scientists that would be would run a risk of slightly overstating or misrepresenting their work in the interest of inflating it. It's not that typical, though. Most scientists are pretty even keeled, but it's more like you see it all the time in some blog or some magazine or something. There are definitely parallel universes, and we're going to go there, or we solved how life originated. Well, okay, hang on, pull it back a little bit. Or just all of these things where they just because that's just an offshoot of clickbait culture. Everybody needs the clicks, and how do you get the click? You lie, and you do this huge thing. But so I don't think that many scientists are like that. And I also don't think that too many scientists are inserting pseudoscience in there, which is belong. Maybe some are. I don't really know. I don't know too much about neuroscience in particular. But yeah, as long as everyone's empirical, I think we're good. I mean, definitely I think the brain is incredibly fascinating as an object, and we are far from fully comprehending it. And there is plenty of room for really surprising research to occur, and revealing that the mind is capable of manipulating the body in interesting ways. But to tie it back to what we were talking about before, certainly to deliberately misrepresent key experiments in physics to insinuate that the mind creates reality, or the degree to inflate the degree to which the mind can just magically heal the body, or magically kill tumor cells, or whatever it is,
Right.
is just baseless, dangerous, wrong, must be neutralized. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to conclude on this last question, mainly because you mentioned the importance of the press, and that even though the scientists doing these studies, do not want to veer into pseudoscience, but the press may want to spin it that way for
Yep.
clicks and whatnot. Do you think that there is a way to convey these studies, or conduct more studies in the field of spiritual neuroscience or social change, specifically with regards to solving various issues, like, for example, in the US, especially in the realm of like identity politics, or maybe like climate change, or mental health, which would be more directly related.
Mhm.
These kinds of issues, or maybe in terms of like fixing our economic system, our healthcare system, etc. On that broader social aspect, do you think there's a spiritual neuroscience can be relevant for solving social issues? And if so, how would you go about it? How would you make sure that that endeavor in and of itself doesn't fall into pseudoscience? I know it's a big question, but why not?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not familiar at all with the science itself. I'd have to read up quite a lot on it. In terms of how it's communicated, of course, anybody is free to communicate science in whatever way they please. It's mainly these larger outlets that are beholden to profit motive. I mean, if you have a magazine or something that employs a lot of people, I mean, they are trying to make as much money as possible. Somebody like myself, a YouTuber, I'll put up whatever I want, and I'll put up a video, and maybe it doesn't do that well and I don't make much money from it. It's fine. So I'm very interested in communicating all of these topics you've just listed with as much integrity as possible. And I'm sure there are dozens of other science communicators that are interested in doing the same. And I think as we see more young people moving into SciComm earlier. So that's actually a really important change, this shift that's been happening for really only the past 5 years or so, is that SciComm used to be relegated to a handful of scientists who had a midlife crisis, or maybe not a midlife crisis, but had a change of heart through their career and decided to turn to SciComm, or just do both. I don't, obviously Sagan I hold in the highest regard possible. But now what we're seeing is undergrads get their science bachelor's and go directly into science communication graduate programs. There are already multiple around the country, and there are science communicator academic positions within, at various universities. So we're seeing science communication as a viable career from a young age, and so we're going to see the numbers of science communicators grow rapidly, and it's sorely needed for all of the reasons we've discussed. And everybody's going to have their own flavor, and hopefully we will see an influx of young, bright, passionate science communicators that are devoted to this task, as I am, and as many of my colleagues are, in communicating the core principles that the scientific community is researching and unraveling, and reporting them to the public without any kind of, there's no, just, I'm somebody, I understand this because I studied it, and I'm going to explain it to you. And hopefully more such figures will crop up, and between the entire science communication community, we will be able to begin to raise the bar of public science literacy and start to solve this immense problem that we have as a society. So that's what I'm devoted to, and I'm also devoted to encouraging that in others, in other young people that are coming up and thinking about SciComm. You know, I think a lot of people study science and then they get into grad school, they get into a lab and go, I kind of don't like this, but I still like science. How can I talk about science? Well, here you go, SciComm. Let's do it. We need you. So, yeah, I think that we will see a lot more people in this area soon, and it's going to be for the better, definitely. So
yeah, I never thought about science communication as a separate academic field until you mentioned it. Like what you said
most
about,
have not. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like you said, like not everyone wants to be pursues science, research
As
at
a
the
researcher,
highest level,
yeah.
right? Just to doing the type of work that you're doing is also really fulfilling, and is really needed, especially if we are going to go about using science for social change, then yeah, the communication aspect has to be really emphasized. And also as someone who's trying to do that for spiritual neuroscience, on my page, I recently been teaching a free spiritual activism course. For me, I focus a bit more on the political aspects of it and how that intersects with spirituality. But also when in that course, I've introduced like studies in spiritual neuroscience before. So yeah, I think for me personally, yes, science communication, learning that as a separate discipline, however much I can get from it, it would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to conclude, basically, I would say that, for those of you watching either on Professor Dave's channel or my channel, yeah, please go ahead, like and subscribe to Professor Dave Explains, which is your YouTube channel. And also, yeah, I look forward to using all of what you said, all of those caveats that you pointed out in the field of spirituality and applying that to my work. And also, I really look forward to holding my movement accountable, holding human ideals accountable to scientific scrutiny. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and helping not only me, but also the viewers here for debunking spiritual pseudoscience. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Happy to help. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
See ya.